No one had ever warned James that a life could change in the space of a single second, that brief blink in which the heart has no time to react and the mind hangs suspended between fear and disbelief. That morning had seemed ordinary, almost trivial. The sun filtered timidly through the clouds, and the familiar murmur of the city accompanied his steps. James walked with the quiet confidence of someone who believes that love, once secured, is stable, almost eternal. Tu Diep lived in his thoughts as a silent certainty, a constant presence that no longer required proof. And precisely because he had grown accustomed to her existence, he did not see the blow coming. There was no dramatic soundtrack, no obvious sign of tragedy. The incident arrived without spectacle. A shaken voice on the other end. Just a brief phone call. An unfinished sentence that was enough to tilt James's world at a dangerous angle. It was not a farewell, nor a confession, but it contained something worse, the real possibility of loss. As he hurried through streets that suddenly felt unbearably long, James felt time stretch in a cruel way. Every step forced him to confront an idea he had long avoided. Tu Diep was not invulnerable. And life did not ask for permission before threatening what mattered most. Her love was not guaranteed. During that frantic walk, memories surfaced uncontrollably, small gestures, conversations that had once seemed insignificant, silences he had not known how to interpret. James remembered the times he postponed saying what mattered, the moments he chose pride over sincerity. The implicit promises he never spoke aloud. The fear did not come only from the possibility of losing Tu Diep. It came from the weight of everything left unsaid. With painful clarity, he understood that love is not measured only by presence, but by attention, by daily care so often taken for granted. When he finally stopped, chest heaving and hands trembling, James realized that the incident was not merely an external warning. Life was reminding him of its fragility. It was an internal call, of how everything can fracture, even when we believe ourselves safe. He thought of how many people live convinced there will always be a tomorrow, to fix things, to love better, to listen more patiently. He saw himself reflected in that deeply human habit of postponing what is essential. That morning, without knowing how it would end, James accepted an uncomfortable but necessary truth. To love also means to be willing to lose. And for that very reason, to choose, every single day, not to. Suspended between fear and hope, he understood that he could not control fate. But he could control how he chose to love Tu Diep from that moment on. Perhaps, he thought, that late awareness was the first step toward not losing her completely. The aftermath of fear in the days that followed the unexpected incident, James discovered that unease does not disappear when danger retreats. It fades only when one dares to look inward. Tu Diep was safe, at least on the surface. But calm did not return to his chest. Something had broken quietly, the illusion that time would always be on his side. From that day on, every gesture of hers carried new weight. It was as if life had sharpened his senses, allowing him to perceive nuances he once ignored, a fleeting smile, a pause before responding, a gaze that drifted away. Everything seemed to contain a hidden message. James began to accompany her with almost obsessive attention, not out of control, but out of fear, fear of not being enough, of not understanding her fully, of realizing too late that love can erode when it is not cultivated. Tu Diep noticed the change. There was a renewed tenderness in him, but also a shadow of anxiety that seeped into even the simplest conversations. She tried to reassure him, reminding him that she was still there, that not everything was as fragile as he believed. Yet even as she spoke those words, she felt something shifting inside herself. Nights grew long for James. Sleep arrived late and left early, making room for thoughts that circled endlessly. He asked himself when he had begun to take Tu Diep's presence for granted, when routine had replaced real stability. He remembered unresolved arguments, decisions made without consulting her, silences swept under the rug. And he understood that love does not break all at once, it cracks slowly, through small omissions that seem harmless until they are not. The words that hurt because they are true one day, as they walked together through an almost empty park. It was not a dramatic gesture, but it was definitive. Tu Diep stopped suddenly. She spoke with a calm that hurt more than any reproach. She told him she, too, had felt fear, not only of losing her life, but of losing herself inside a relationship where she sometimes felt invisible. They were truths spoken with exhaustion. Her words were not accusations. James listened in silence, aware that interrupting her would be yet another way of failing to see her. That moment marked a new descent in the emotional mountain they were climbing together. James felt shame, but also gratitude. He understood that this crisis was not a punishment, it was an uncomfortable opportunity to grow. In their story, he recognized the story of so many people who love without learning how to care. Who stay together while drifting apart inside. Everyday life, with its urgency and responsibilities, often disguises these distances, until a sudden jolt forces us to face them. That evening ended without grand promises or immediate solutions. There was only a tacit agreement to try to be more honest, even when truth felt uncomfortable. James knew the road ahead would be uncertain, full of highs and lows. But he also understood something essential. Loving is not clinging out of fear of loss. It is choosing to stay with the courage of someone who knows everything can end and still decides to try again. The long middle time continued its relentless march, bringing with it a strange, quiet phase. Nothing seemed to fully break, but nothing healed completely either. James and Tu Diep remained together, sharing the same spaces, the same mornings, the same meals. Yet something invisible stood between them, like living in a familiar house where some doors no longer opened as easily. That feeling, so ordinary and so human, weighed more heavily than any argument. James tried to change, not through grand gestures, but through small ones. Listening without interrupting. Asking without assuming, staying when he would once have escaped into work or silence. And that slowness frustrated him. But real change is slow. Every time Tu Diep grew distant, the ground seemed to tremble beneath his feet. The fear of losing her returned, not as a sudden blow, but as a constant drizzle that soaked into his bones. Tu Diep was fighting her own internal battle. She wanted to believe in this new James, in his sincere efforts. But the past whispered softly. Like many people, she had learned to protect herself not by fleeing, but by slowly closing off. Sometimes she caught herself imagining a different life, one where she did not have to explain what she felt. And then she blamed herself for those thoughts, because she still loved him. Where love hurt less. The photograph. One ordinary afternoon, while sorting through old belongings, they came across a forgotten object. A photograph from a time when they were happy, when the future felt guaranteed. There were no reproaches, only a shared nostalgia that struck with unexpected force. They stared at it in silence. In that image, there were not only the two of them, but also the versions of themselves they had left behind. James realized then that he was not only afraid of losing Tu Diep, he was afraid of losing the chance to truly find her again. That night, they talked for a long time. It was not a perfect conversation, nor did it end with clear answers. There were awkward pauses, poorly chosen words, restrained tears. James admitted his fears without justification. But there was honesty. Tu Diep confessed her exhaustion without attack. It was one of those fragile moments that can either destroy everything or begin rebuilding it from the foundation. As in life itself, nothing was resolved, but both understood something vital. Love does not always move in a straight line. Sometimes it stops, retreats, hesitates, and it is precisely in those fluctuations that we discover whether we are willing to keep walking, not out of habit. Choosing again the next morning arrived with a deceptive calm, but out of conscious choice. James woke before Tu Diep and watched her sleep, as if that simple gesture could be engraved forever in his memory. Her steady breathing filled him with tenderness, and with fear. What if one day he no longer woke beside her? He stepped outside, the cold air clearing his thoughts. He thought of all the times he had assumed she would always be there, that love was stable, almost automatic. Now he understood. Love is not an eternal contract, but a promise renewed daily, with actions, words, shared silences. Tu Diep joined him later, wrapped in a blanket, hair still messy. They sat together without touching at first, like two people relearning how to be close without hurting each other. It was not dramatic, just simple, almost shy, but full of meaning. Then, slowly, their hands met. They spoke of the future, of fears, of dreams not yet extinguished. James admitted that the thought of losing her had shaken him awake. He told her he wanted to be someone she could trust without reservation, someone who would not flee when things became difficult. Tu Diep confessed, softly, that she had also considered leaving, but part of her still believed in them, in this imperfect but real story. At that moment, the sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the small patio with warm light. Just a quiet symbol. Even after the storm, the day continues. Not a miracle. They understood they could not control everything. Life would always hold surprises, some painful, others beautiful. But they could choose how to respond. James realized that loving is not only protecting, it is accepting fragility, both the others and one's own. And Tu Diep felt that perhaps the real miracle was not never losing each other, but finding each other again and again, even after fear. Without grand promises or perfect endings, they chose to keep walking together. The lesson that remains: life often teaches its hardest lessons too late. We walk under the mistaken certainty that what we have today will remain tomorrow. That happy moments will repeat themselves effortlessly. That those who love us will always wait. Valuing is not just saying thank you when things are good, it is listening when the other grows quiet. It is noticing exhaustion behind a smile. It is understanding that love, too, can grow tired of waiting. In the rush of daily life, we excuse our absences with work, stress, responsibility. But life does not warn us when that tomorrow disappears. We say tomorrow will be better. And so the true learning arrives, to love in time. With a humbler heart and more open eyes, we move forward, knowing that the deepest lesson of life is not loving forever, but loving consciously while we can.